I'm gonna let you go after this, Sky. Your mind is too far gone, and I need you to take care of our son. I don't want him to grow up in this shit.
T-Mac said. For the first time since I met him, I saw T-Mac as a human being. He was more than just the monster that did this to me, the black demon that murdered my father. He was a human who was afraid for his own seed. Maybe he regretted his life, but I knew I had a weapon against him now. I could never love this child of his, but I could torture and beat this child and make T-Mac watch as his son suffered just as much as he made me suffer. So I would let this black bastard live just so I can see the look of anguish on T-Mac's face as I destroyed his son. T-Mac tried to sell me to an Arab man after I had his son. I remembered T-Mac holding his son that was many shades lighter than him. I knew I would hate that boy forever. He looked so much like T-Mac. I named him Jesse.
This is it, boy. I'm never gonna see you again after this. This is the only way I know how to protect you. I'm never gonna change.
T-Mac whispered into his newborn son's ear. He said several other things to his son, but I could not hear them. He kissed him on his infant forehead and gave him back to me. For a moment, the monster was gone again, and an old and haggard-looking human man stood before me. He seemed helpless as he stared at his son in my arms. I wonder if he thought I was a demoness who would torture his son. If for a moment he thought of me as I had always thought of him, a cruel monster who was hell-bent on destroying me. I was sold like a common black slave with a black baby to an Arab man. The Arab man took me and T-Mac's son to Saudi Arabia. I didn't last there for very long. I spoke the language and understood the culture, but I was clearly Egyptian, and the Arabs there did not like me or the two kids I had in tow. One was black like his father, the other was white like her father. I could not even try to pretend that they had the same father. My son could pass as the Arab's son, but not my daughter. I had 2 kids with this Arab. I eventually came back to America and divorced the Arab. It was not his fault. I was gone mentally, and I was no good to anyone. I could barely take care of myself. The Arab man was a good man. He offered to take Maya and Jesse and raise them as his own with his blood kids. I refused. I would have given him Maya, but Jesse I had to keep. I had dreamed of coming back to America just to beat and torture Jesse. I wanted to get T-Mac's son strung out on drugs and watch as men raped him. I had sold Jesse to white men for a bag of crack. That was all he was worth to me. I would smoke that crack and record these white pedophiles as they beat and raped Jesse. I never saw Jesse when I stared at him. All I saw was T-Mac. As those white men laughed and raped Jesse, I saw them beating and raping T-Mac. I recorded it because I wanted to show T-Mac what I had done to his son that he pretended to love. I wondered how it would make T-Mac feel to see his 5-year-old son being beat near to death and taking it up the ass by white men. Maybe T-Mac would understand a fraction of the pain he put me through. But I was not going to stop there. I wanted to shoot Jesse in the head like I watched T-Mac shoot my father in the head. I wanted to hear T-Mac scream in pain as his flesh and blood died in front of him. I was sure T-Mac would kill me, but I was already more dead than alive anyway. I would die with a smile on my face. But I never got that chance. I never saw T-Mac again after he held Jesse and sold me to that Arab. I knew he was still around, but he avoided me and instructed all his women to leave me alone. I didn't want for anything. Money would be slid under my door in an envelope. It was always over $1,000. My rent was paid and groceries were placed at my door. Jesse and the other kids always had new clothes that were dropped off. All I had to do was stay in the house and be a mother. Many years ago, that would have been an ideal life for me. But not now. My mind was so far gone with the pain and trauma, and I was so obsessed with destroying Jesse that I didn't see how easy I had it. T-Mac was a monster. There's no doubt about that. The only reason he let me go was because he knew he could not raise a kid in the life he had chosen. I guess even a monster cared about his offspring to a certain extent. I became somewhat of a legend among the women of the night, the girls who worked Miracle Mile in Tucson, Arizona. They called my story with T-Mac Beauty and the Beast. They said I was able to tame him. Everyone was told on pain of their life to leave me alone, that I was untouchable, that if anyone touched me or my kids, T-Mac would wipe out their entire families. T-Mac had a reputation on the streets. He was brutal and cold to all who crossed him. Whatever word T-Mac put out, that was the word that would be followed. No one wanted to cross T-Mac. I spoke to many of the women who worked the streets near where I lived. I am certain there are dozens, if not hundreds, of unsolved murders and disappearances tied to T-Mac in some way. He had killed so many women and left their bodies to rot in ditches that I lost count. There were shelters made to protect women from him. He was one of the most wanted sex traffickers in all of the Southwest. Yet he never saw a day in court or got caught for his horrendous murders and crimes. If anyone was untouchable, it was T-Mac. Jesse was eventually taken from me and placed in the custody of the state. I lost contact with him and all of my other kids. I was sad at first, but then I understood that it was best for my kids not to be around me. It took me many years to eventually regret what I did to Jesse. Out of all my kids, I treated him the worst. I went out of my way to do horrible things to him, because that poor boy never had a chance to be seen by me as anything other than T-Mac's son. He never got the benefit of a loving mother. As I got off the drugs, I started to see my father less and less. His look of shame and disappointment would disappear, and I was left with the emptiness of all that I had done and what I had endured. After years of being sober, I started to have seizures. I eventually lost feeling in my legs and my ability to walk. I was confined to a wheelchair. While sitting in that wheelchair, I remember crying for no reason. I would cry every time I thought of Jesse. It took me years to understand that I had become Jesse's T-Mac. The demon that T-Mac had been to me, I became that very same demon to my son. Even to this day, it feels strange to call that boy, well, a man now, my son. I spent so much of my life hating and trying to kill that boy that I think my mind shuts down when I think of him as my son. Because how could any mother do such a thing to their child? When I thought I was healed enough to try and talk to Jesse, for my selfish need to not be such a monster and talk to him, it would always fall apart because eventually the conversation would come back to what I did to him and his father. I was not ready to have that conversation. When I would see Jesse's face furrow in anger, I saw T-Mac again in him. Jesse looks so much like him, it's scary. I would shut down and call the police. I would lie and say a black man was threatening me. Of course, the police would believe me. I could pass as white and I was disabled. Jesse, despite his lighter skin tone, was still an obvious black man. I would smile as I would watch Jesse cry as those white cops restrained him for no reason and place him under arrest. I would envision that it was T-Mac they were arresting. Jesse would cry as he stared at me from the back of the police car. He was not crying because he was arrested. His heart was breaking again. I was his abuser and his mother. He was torn between loving and hating me. He wanted a relationship with me, but I knew he hated me. I remember I invited him to spend the night. The way he would look at me sometimes, I could see he wanted to murder me. I was so afraid of him that I would lock my room door at night. I don't think I would ever be ready to have a relationship with my son. But like a hoe who needed the love of her pimp, my son needed my love. He needed me to say I was sorry for what I did to him. He wanted to live in the fantasy world of me being a loving mother to him, and I could never do that. So I had to block him and move on with my life. I knew I would hurt him again. I would destroy the life he's building with his wife and kids. It took me years to understand that he is not T-Mac, and the sins of the father should not be forced upon the son. But then again, Jesse was a child made from rape. He was a child I never wanted, and I was forced to have for my rapist.